Welcome to another episode of Dynamics Compass, where we interview the experts so you don't have to figure it out the hard way. James Ash is joining us today. He is a cloud solutions architect at Crowe, where he spent nearly 8 years, his entire career, implementing Microsoft's ERP stack for manufacturing and distribution companies across North America. He started as an intern, moved into full lifecycle delivery, where he architected implementations across 42 manufacturing facilities, and now sits on the pre-sales side, helping IT leaders build ERP business cases before a project even kicks off. He holds a mechanical engineer degree and an MBA in business analytics from the University of Alabama, and carries a PMP and a CPIM certifications. The latter being something he actually uses to challenge clients on whether they're following best practices or just chasing features. James, thanks so much for joining. You've got great pedigrees to have a good discussion today.
It's quite the introduction. It's much appreciated. I'm happy to be here.
Uh, thank you. Something I always do for anyone that's watching. So people that don't know you yet, kind of an icebreaker. Could you please share something that not a lot of people know about you yet?
Yeah, I'll go on the personal side of things. In 2023, I actually took a sabbatical from work for about 10 months to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. So in the U.S., that's a trail that goes from the border of Mexico to the border of Canada in the U.S. through California, Oregon, and Washington. So that took a good amount of time. So maybe my fun fact is I enjoy the outdoors.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's the proof. How long did that take you?
About 5.5 months.
For just walk with a tent or motels?
Tent until you stay in a town sometimes to get some more food and things, but the majority of the time it's sleeping outdoors.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Um, what time of year did you go? Because I know it can get pretty cold down that
Yeah,
track.
yeah. So April through August. Mhm.
Okay.
So it was on the warmer side for quite a bit of it.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds amazing. I before I became a dad, I started getting into hiking when I still lived in Australia.
Okay.
Haven't really done it since I become a dad, but my dream is to do Machu Picchu, the Inca Trail
Oh
in
yeah.
Peru, which is like a
Okay.
4 day is nothing compared to what you did. But to do it as a family, that's my goal. So I'm waiting till everyone can walk properly, and
Yeah.
then book the tickets to Peru. So
There you
that
go.
sounds
That's
amazing.
exciting. No, I'm
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. That'd be fun.
I I bet there were a lot of things that didn't go as planned during such a long time.
I think I was able to use some things I've learned from implementations to reset expectations as I was on my hike.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Would love to hear more
Mm.
on another conversation.
Yeah.
Let's dive in. You've implemented D365 across 42 manufacturing facilities, discrete process, plastics, metals, machine parts. When you look back at the implementations that struggled the most, what's the pattern you kept seeing?
Yeah, I would say three things. So I would say when an implementation struggles, it would be a lack of a strong direction or a strategy from leadership for what you actually want to get out of a new system. And often it's there, right? You go through the sales cycles, you talk outcomes, you kick off the project, and you have an initial strategy, and then leadership goes away. And then you're talking with subject matter experts, people in the business, and then you're talking day to day. Hey, here's how we do it today. Here's what I need. I need this. I need that. Here's how I want to do it. And then eventually, if leadership isn't involved and checkpoints are reiterating, hey, here's the direction, here's the strategy, here's what we're trying to get out, then you end up with a configuration that might not align with that. So you need to manage that from a project management, change management perspective. The second thing I would say that I see is businesses will be coming off of a legacy system that they've customized over 15 years. And then they think in 15 months you're going to go live and that's the finish line. And that's going to have all of the benefits and it's going to be fantastic and it is going to be better than what you had. But you have to realize that go live is maybe the midway point, not the finish line where you have to say, here are the features and the outcomes that we want to get live. And then here's the roadmap for where we want to go. And so that you can implement incrementally based on when your business is ready for some of those different processes or features. And then the third thing would be thinking throwing a new system will solve process gaps without being intentional, because really it's talking about, hey, what do you want to do from a business perspective? And I know we'll get into this. And then how does the system support that? Not just, hey, we're giving a nice shiny new tool and that's going to fix all of the process gaps in our business. Those would be the three main things I see.
Yeah. Okay. Just I could ask questions about all of them. Just the second point that you mentioned. So you recommend going with like a minimum viable product, and then keep adding to it instead of doing everything all in once. Um, Better to do it in a staged way.
Yeah, I would say that sometimes you can get into trouble where we call it gold plating, where, hey, you have something that's going to work, but then hey, I want another field, I want another feature, I want to do it this way. We need more guardrails here, and then it ends up sort of getting out of control from a project timeline or a
Mhm.
scope perspective. And so maybe it's not always the minimal viable product in terms of what you go live with. Every business is different, but understanding that, hey, if you want time to value, let's get business processes set up where you're getting benefit from the system, and then that optimization piece can happen after the fact. Now, that's not always the best option, but often I see that's a better way of getting to value faster and then
Yeah.
adding on the bells and whistles later.
Yeah. I think that's a good focus to have the time to value. Um, You've also talked about companies wanting to activate every planning and warehouse feature on day one, kind of what you talked about just now. Can you walk us through what that actually looks like in practice? Like, what does a client typically ask for at the start, and where does it go wrong?
Yeah. Yeah. So pretty consistently, especially around like things, warehousing and planning, where they might not have a robust system today. And they're really excited about this new tool, but it's really the mindset where it can become an issue is when the mindset is, what can the system do? The right mindset is, how do we actually want to operate as a business? And then have the system support that. So if you go with a mindset of what can the system do, it creates two problems. First, it slows things down. Anyone who's opened up warehousing, transportation parameters, or planning parameters, if you were to go through each one and explain, here's what it does, here are all of your options, that can really slow things down because there's just so many options. And so if you don't clearly prioritize, that can become an issue. And then secondly, you end up designing a process around the system, whether instead of around the business, which then you have poor adoption and can lead to some confusion. So the shift that I try to drive toward would be, what does good look like for your business? And that can be very different things. If you're coming from Excel, good can look like, hey, we just have an MRP system, and maybe the base is helpful, and then you optimize after from a change management perspective. Some people are coming from pretty advanced systems but just want something more modern, and so maybe they could take on a bit more. So the first question I ask is, what does good look like for your business? And maybe I'll give an example in Dynamics. So, warehouse management, you might want to have automated wave processing with system directed picking and mobile device. And if they're coming from a background where they don't have mobile devices today, that could just lead to more confusion from a change management perspective. So maybe it's still, hey, we print the work report out. They get handed a list of work report items, or they know if it's on the printer, I need to do it. Then it's user directed picking. So now they're getting familiar with the mobile device. And then after a certain amount of time where they're comfortable with it, then you could say, okay, we're moving to system directed picking. So maybe sometimes, not always, simpler process, stabilize operations, and then you can layer in some of the more advanced functionality.
Yeah. It sounds like you're really ingraining change management into your implementation activities as well. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
ingrained instead of parallel,
Yeah,
if that
you have
makes
to
sense.
design, yeah, people focused design. And then change management is huge because you can build the best system and configure it perfectly. But if they're not using the system, then you're not getting the value that you set out to get when you agreed to this project.
Yeah. So it's the first time there might be other companies that do it the same way, but this is the first time that I hear someone talk about, okay, we're not gonna do the brand new thing first. Maybe let's start with a printout and leaving it there for a hand picker as a step towards the end goal. I think
Yeah.
that's really good.
And some businesses can go directly to the system directed stuff. It's all
Yeah,
dependent, but we need to be realistic for what someone can handle in a short amount of time of implementation from a change perspective.
yeah. No, I agree. Um, there's also real tension between what D365 can do and what a company is actually ready to absorb. How do you assess that gap early on, and what are the early warning signs that a client is overreaching?
Yeah, and often that tension can be really real. So I usually think about it in terms of process maturity and then trust in the system. So those being the main two. So early on, I would try to assess maybe a few things. So how reliable and clean is their data? And how standardized are their processes today? And then how decisions are actually being made today. So maybe I'll use planning as an example. So one of the biggest signals from like planning would be how much does the process rely on the individual today versus the system? And what I mean by that is a common pattern that I see is you have these wonderfully experienced planners or inventory coordinators, whatever the term that you use in your business. And all they do is they pull all of the data outside of their legacy system and they build a report with their secret sauce, right? They know what they're looking for
And they've
and
got it
they
in their
build
head.
out this report where they decide what to buy or produce or transfer. And that tells me two things when that's happening. First, there's very valuable business logic there for how they're going about and building out the report, but there's low trust in the system to make decisions. And so where I see clients start to overreach is where they jump straight into that advanced functionality where, okay, now you get a list of planned orders that have already been grouped together by period and it's addressing forecast and sales orders and things like that, but you're not addressing the trust gap. Because I've even seen in cases where they have that report with the secret sauce,
Yeah.
and you could build out in Power BI using inventory visibility or something like that, maybe a report that's almost one to one, but they still don't trust it because they weren't a part of the process of aggregating that data and making decisions and putting that report together. And so it goes back to the thing, you can give them the planned orders form and all of that stuff, but if you don't build that trust, they're just going to pull out the raw data into Excel and keep going the way they've been going.
Yeah. And with that first point, when the data quality is low and they're basically not ready yet to do the implementation, is that even when you tell them like, hey, your data isn't ready, do they still underestimate the task at hand to get their data ready?
I would say that I've heard the phrase a lot that the data is the longest pole in the tent since we were talking about hiking earlier, where
Yeah.
everything revolves around data and more so in planning than everywhere else. So if you want to, for instance, turn on capable to promise for coming up with a promise date for sales order entry, if your transportation calendars, if your route lead times, if your inventory is not accurate, if your vendor lead times aren't accurate, then the first time someone tries to use that and the order is late and they trusted the system, all that trust is gone. And so that's where I'm coming from the angle of we need to focus on data, but we have to understand where it is when you want to go live, because maybe it is better to say, hey, we'll use available to promise with more historical lead times as we build out the transportation calendars, or we actually do an analysis and come up with more accurate route times. And so if we can't trust the data, saying let's not use it for now, but let's start building out those capabilities. Sometimes I would say actually most of the time we get there over the course of an implementation, but sometimes it's a big hurdle to jump over based on what legacy system they're coming from.
Yeah. Okay. And when you recommend a phased approach, starting with tools equivalent to what a company is already using, then layering on complexity, how do clients typically react to that? Because I imagine some are paying for D365 and they want all of it immediately.
Yeah, yeah, and it can be a difficult conversation where okay, hey, we want outcomes, and it's all reframing it around the outcomes and the value that you're going to get out of the system. And it can be a tough conversation saying, even if we turn this parameter on, or we're going to use capable to promise, you're not ready to get the value out of that. It would actually be more valuable to use something like available to promise because your data is just not there. Now, maybe that conversation's happening 2 months into a 15-month project, and we can course correct and we can get there. But it's all about being realistic and saying, hey, you might not have this day one, but here's the roadmap for how we're going to get you there by month 3 post go live. And then you can start capturing that value without eroding the trust by trying to take on too much too fast.
Yeah. And you find many business leaders receptive to that recommendation?
Yeah, I think if you're framing it always through the lens of how are we going to get you to the outcomes you want, and how are we going to capture the value that is considering the return on investment. So you're investing time and money into this. How are we going to capture that value back for you to align with the outcomes you want? And it's a different conversation each time, but I've found that having it early and often, those conversations, the leadership is always
Yeah.
very receptive to that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's across all the conversations that I've had. That seems to be the thing. Like the earlier you tackle something, you manage the expectations, it becomes easier. But if you wait till things start going wrong, now it becomes a harder conversation, and there's a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
Often, not all the
And it
time.
it always comes down to, right, it's the change management and project management piece of making sure that the project structure is set up in the right way so you can have those tough conversations uh, as often as they need to be had.
Yeah. All right. About your certification, you've got the CPIM certification, which is about production and inventory best practices. How does that shape the way you push back on clients who want to configure the system around the way they've always done things rather than where they need to go?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really helped shape how I think about just the supply chain process design as a whole and how ERP supports that because Dynamics really was created with that in mind where it's interesting because I actually learned Dynamics first and then maybe a year or two after that got the CPIM to really round out those skill sets. And on the diagram of the CPIM and all of the okay, hey, sales and operations planning and MRP and capacity planning, I was like, oh, there's a whole feature set for this, and here's how it ties into this. And so it really was built with those best practices in mind.
Yeah.
Um, but sometimes it's saying, hey, here's how we do things today. And those were built around the constraints of the legacy system, which could include lack of visibility that causes people to create workarounds. So maybe I would say instead of pushing back directly of, hey, I don't think you're doing it the right way because they're obviously successful enough to invest in this project and they've been doing it with a limited toolkit so that they know what they ought to be doing. Maybe I'll say that, but I reframe the conversation around what objectives are you trying to get out of this. So if we're talking service levels or inventory turns or planning stability, anything like that, saying,
Yeah.
okay, what are you trying to achieve? Here's how the system that was designed around the CPIM concepts, here's how we do sales and operations planning, and here's how we do uh, MRP and capacity planning and inventory policies and things like that. So that it's more so a reframing of let's say, what are you trying to do? Ignore what you've done in the past with your limited toolkit, and then show here's how the modern system is going to support the outcomes you've told me that you want. So maybe I'll end with saying I often say, we can absolutely configure the system to match your current process, but actually first let's evaluate whether that process is actually helping or hurting those outcomes you told me were important to you.
Yeah. Because I meant you said you got the certification when you were 2 years in. Did you see? I'm imagining you were also speaking to the day-to-day users of the system on the shop floor. Did you notice a shift once you increase your knowledge, um, that you got more buy-in even from the people on the shop floor, that you could connect with them easier?
Yeah, I would say it really helped me understand what's important, and the terminology was probably the biggest help there is often using a shared language is helpful when you're working with that particular team. And so if you're speaking their language and about what's important to them, it's easier to connect and understand how you can help enable a particular outcome. So I would say it really helps drive those conversations. So anyone who's involved in the area, I would really recommend looking into that as a certification because yes, it's, the design of the overall process, but it also helps you relate to the people that you're trying to drive outcomes for by building a shared language.
Yeah, exactly. Because in my line of work, I often get the requirement like, we like someone who used to be on the shop floor before they became an ERP consultant.
Mhm.
Um, but then you coming straight out of university into consulting, there's a lot of value I see from upskilling yourself in this way to still speaking the same language and actually fully understanding what these users do, even though you've not been shoulder to shoulder in that role yourself.
Yeah, I definitely, and every career path is different. I was definitely technology first, and then had to upskill and related to the business side of things for the supply chain with the CPIM, and then it's okay now getting that experience and understanding how does the textbook relate to what actually could happen out on the shop floor, and then
Yeah.
where are those usually different?
Oh yeah, for sure. Um, you made a point that the biggest driver of implementation risk isn't whether it's discrete or process manufacturing. This was in an earlier conversation you and I had. But it's a distance between what a company uses today and what they're about to adopt. Can you unpack that? And what does that distance actually look like in real terms?
Yeah, and when I talk about distance, yeah, it's really the gap between how they're operating today and what they're asking the new system to do, and it's across three main areas. I would say it's across process, data, and people. So first being the process side of things, a lot of companies are coming from a legacy systems where they're either using spreadsheets or a legacy system that's very flexible, which means that the process is a very person-driven process. So decisions can be made in people's heads or custom reports that they're exporting data and building out. And then moving to a modern system like D365 requires more standardization, and now it's a system-driven process. So moving from a person-driven to a system-driven process, that's a big shift.
Yeah.
Um, Second, and I know we already touched on this, would be the data maturity and accuracy piece of things. So the advanced functionality related to planning, warehousing, things like that in Dynamics, it assumes you already have reliable data. And we already talked about all the different lead times, routings, and things like that. But if that data doesn't exist today, the system could run, but like we already mentioned, you'll stop trusting those outputs the first
Yeah.
time you get burnt by the system.
Yeah.
Um, and then the third thing would be the decision ownership and discipline. So that's the people side of things. So in some environments, like we already had mentioned, planners are overriding everything. They're making judgment calls. But in a more mature model, the system would generate those signals and then planners would manage by exception. And so that's not just a system change where you have new features, just like that change management piece that we mentioned. That's a behavioral change. Um, and so that all plays into the overall change readiness, where how comfortable is the organization with standardizing those new processes and letting go of those uh, legacy processes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for unpacking that. Um, so last one. If a CFO or IT director is about to sign off on a D365 implementation for their manufacturing or supply chain project, what's the one thing that they should be doing or looking at right now?
Yeah, I would say the biggest piece of advice that I always mention is that do not treat this as a system implementation. Treat this as a business transformation project. So Dynamics will absolutely enable better planning, visibility, controls, but it won't fix broken processes by itself. So if you simply just configure the system around the current ways of working or the current ways of thinking, you could risk designing inefficiencies into a very powerful system that those inefficiencies wouldn't otherwise be there. And so the implementation value comes from aligning on those desired outcomes early and then saying, with the new toolkit that we have, with the new system that we have, how do we best drive to those outcomes? So that would really influence then how you're planning for demand, how you'll use MRP, your inventory policies, how you're going to do sales and operations planning. Those aren't system decisions. They truly are business decisions for how you want to operate. It's just now the system will be configured to enable those business decisions to be implemented. So
Yeah.
that's the main piece of advice. And then I'd also emphasize ownership, that this isn't an IT project where it's just IT involved or just finance involved. The entire business has to be involved and has to really drive the project forward, because I would say that the most successful implementation I've seen is when, going back to the first question that you asked, when leadership is aligned on what good looks like for their business and what vision that they have before the configuration even starts. So if I had to boil it down, I would say, define your desired outcomes and strategy for achieving those outcomes, then let D365 enable that. So do it from a business first. Think business first, not system first.
Yeah. I think having been in the field for 14 years in the ERP field and in general, I think things have shifted, and that might be maybe I'm just seeing a small part of it. But when I started 14 years ago, it did seem to be very IT driven. The CFOs like, oh, we're gonna get this new application stack. Whereas now, indeed, I hear more and more business leaders um, being involved in making the end call and working with all their department heads. Not no longer just the CIO doing that.
Yeah.
So
And then that all
important point.
plays into change management and adoption and things like that we were talking about.
Yeah. Great. Thanks so much for sharing all that knowledge and those insights. Um, if anyone has any questions about anything you brought up, or they recognize something like, oh, what James said, we're dealing with that right now. What's the best way they could reach out to you?
Honestly, I'm always helping people out via email. So honestly, if you just want to shoot me an email at james.ash@crowe.com, and Crowe is CROWE.com, and we can talk through anything like that. Often like helping bounce ideas off of people and helping them work through achieving those outcomes.
All right. Well, thanks so much, and I'm sure I'll run into you in one of the events this year. But thanks
Yeah,
so much for
sounds
your
good.
knowledge,
Looking
James.
forward to meeting you in person.
All right. Cheers, James.
Awesome. Cheers. Thanks
Thanks for watching another episode of Dynamics Compass. I started doing the podcast because in my work as a recruiter, I was speaking to all these Dynamics decision makers that had the same kind of questions. So I figured, well, I have a big network of Microsoft Dynamics experts. Why don't I just approach them, interview them, record it, and make all the answers freely available? So if there's a question that you really want answered that is Dynamics related, let me know. Find me on LinkedIn or write to me on Rory at thegoodtalent.co, and I'll find the expert, I'll interview them, and make it freely available so you're informed and you can keep progressing your Microsoft Dynamics journey. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great day. Bye.